Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte. Tomorrow, we're broadcasting live from the newly renovated and reopened Iron Horse Music Hall in Northampton with live music from opening night headliners Rachel and Vilry.
But today on the show, we'll look at the over 40 years of history in that hallowed music hall with Iron Horse founder Geordie Harold, music writer David Sokol, Forbes Library historian Dylan Gaffney, and former manager and wait staff from the horse, Mary Gravel.
We'll also preview an inclusive free-for-all field day happening in Holyoke this Saturday.
But speaking of hallowed music halls...
I mean, I've heard the song Alice's Restaurant a billion times.
We played it when we were at our former radio home, The River, every Thanksgiving.
If people aren't familiar with Alice's Restaurant, the mythology behind it, Arlo Guthrie's storytelling in that, and how this church, which houses the Guthrie Center, plays into it, tell us a little bit of that story.
Oh,
you don't have to tell us the Arlo length
we don't
version.
have to do the 18-minute, 20-second version of Alice's Restaurant.
This song is called Alice's Restaurant. It's about Alice and the restaurant.
My dad, Arlo, is my dad. He went to high school at the time. It was called Stockbridge School, right down the road here. Alice and Ray, who lived in this church, Alice was a librarian, and I believe Ray was like a groundskeeper at the school. And they were kind of on the younger side of the teachers there. It was a progressive high school. So in 1965, Arlo had made friends with Ray and Alice, and they invited him to Thanksgiving dinner. He showed up with his friend Rick Robbins. What we're standing in right now is the sanctuary, and apparently there was some garbage in here in the sanctuary. And then Rick and Arlo decided to do Alice and Ray a favor and bring it to the dump. The dump was closed because it was Thanksgiving, and they found a spot on the side of the road. They dumped the garbage because there was other garbage there, so they thought that they could just add to the other garbage. They were caught. They were arrested for littering. Arlo gets drafted. He gets denied entry into the services. We actually had a funny shirt that said "not moral enough to join the army." In the whole process, he's writing a song. Everybody had already kind of coined the song like a anti-war, anti-establishment. Arlo calls it anti-stupid. But it meant a lot to a lot of people. The biggest purchaser of the song Alice's Restaurant, or the album, in 1967 when it was released, was the U.S. Army. It kind of became an anthem for individuals who maybe agreed with some of the stuff that Arlo was talking about in the song. And so when this place became available to purchase, now this space holds something special to those same people. At the very beginning with the St. James Chapel, it was built because those individuals felt like they didn't fit in their community. So they wanted their own space. And I've always kind of just been like, this has always been that space for individuals who might not fit in somewhere else, but you're welcome here.
This land is your land, and this land is mine.
My name is Mo Guthrie. I'm the director here at the Guthrie Center.
Where do you fall in the Guthrie lineage?
So I'm Arlo's daughter, his middle daughter, Annie, and Shivadas, Mo, is my son.
Woody's your great-grandfather. Arlo's your grandfather.
That is correct.
Gotcha.
Yes, yeah. So the building that we're standing in today was originally built as the St. James Chapel in 1829. It was a Dutch Episcopal church that served the community here in Housatonic and Great Barrington. A few years later, in 1866, they expanded upon the building and built it into what we know as the Trinity Church today. That church did close its doors in the 1940s. They deconsecrated the space, and it sat relatively unused for a while until a young Ray and Alice Brock moved into town and purchased the space and used it as a residence for themselves. Fast forward past the events of Alice's Restaurant in the 1960s, and in the early 1970s, the church did change hands a couple more times, and it wasn't until 1991 that we became the Guthrie Center. If you guys want to follow me, I'll show you into the sanctuary. And,
I love that the sign outside of the church says BYOG, Bring Your Own God.
Church. Since we were founded in 1991, we've held non-denominational interfaith services is a big part of what we do. All are welcome to attend. So this is the sanctuary space. This is where we hold all of our programs and events, whether it be community lunch or Thanksgiving or one of our troubadour concerts in the summertime. This is where it all goes down. We also have quite a bit of really amazing archives and artifacts that are here, some related to the church itself, some related to Guthrie family history. For instance, these paintings that you'll see on the walls are our Guthrie ancestors from folx, Scotland.
Whoa. There was no way I thought that was going to be Guthrie family history. I thought that was definitely going to be some sort of church
random
history.
Like founders of the church, people in the community.
No, so these are our ancestors. These are here due to an organization called Friends of Guthrie Castle.
Any of these Scottish Guthrie ancestors musicians that you know of?
Actually, we did some research one time. We had an individual who found music scores, sheets that were written by a Guthrie from Guthrie Castle. So it's like songwriting is kind of, I think, been around in our family for quite a while. We do have archives also here from Arlo Guthrie, Woody Guthrie. We're getting ready to do a big display in the lobby called Arlo Guthrie Native Son, getting ready to open that. Mm-hmm. We also have on the wall some items from the Troubadour in LA, which was a very famous venue. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it.
Oh, sure.
My mother and father met at the Troubadour. My mother was a hostess there. We have just started the Arlo Guthrie Family Archives, cataloging, discovering what he has. We have 3 buildings full of stuff. It's fun for me because I'd be like, oh, Dad wasn't lying. He was really at, the Chicago 7 trial. Just found a subpoena where they subpoenaed him to testify for Abby Hoffman. So Just fun stuff that we will be putting out on display here at the center.
I keep seeing instruments everywhere. There was a dulcimer in the lobby, and I'm looking up at a harp.
Yeah, yes. Would you guys like to check out the musical instrument lending library?
Yeah.
There's a musical instrument lending library.
There is.
It's called the This Machine Kills Fascists Lending Library.
Well, in all seriousness, we call it Check It Out.
Okay.
Folks are welcome to come on down and check whatever suits their needs out for a month or so at a time. The program was actually started by my predecessor, George Lay. And his thoughts behind it was, as he often says, he didn't want any Beethovens to fall through the cracks. Eliminating, a financial barrier that may be an issue for some folks to get instruments into their hands.
We are at the Church of Guthrie, for lack of a better way to describe it, the Guthrie Center in Great Barrington with Annie Guthrie and Mo Guthrie, who are giving us the grand tour of this sacred space on so many levels.
Yes.
Look at this. Got the beautiful stained glass up here.
It just kind of gives off a vibe of peace.
When Arlo purchased the building in 1991, he thought, well, I'm going to start a nonprofit and serve the community. The mission says to meet the ongoing needs of the community. It's very vague. And he wanted to keep it that way because we didn't know what the needs were going to be. Those needs might change. And it has. Like in the 90s, it was AIDS. So we were helping people get to appointments. We were spending time with individuals who were dying alone. And there was a lot of bad press. There's all these headlines, Arlo Guthrie brings AIDS to the Berkshires. But that's not what he was doing. What he was doing was bringing care for individuals. Now those needs have changed. We feed people once a week. We have free community lunch. We have a free Thanksgiving meal every year. We have a new tutoring program for GED.
A lot of our volunteers are actually retired educators. So what we'll be offering here in the building starting May 15th and weekly on Wednesdays will be a GED study group where folks can come down free of charge, have access to the internet, computers, some help from our volunteers who might be able to show them strategies, testing strategies, and just try to help folks, schedule at testing centers, help them in any way that we can.
How big is your fleet of volunteers?
We have a pretty good network. For instance, our volunteer mailing list is probably about 150 folks, but we have a core group of volunteers, I would say maybe 30, who are heavily involved in the center.
Yeah, and the other things, May seems to be like the magic month for us this year. We have a lot happening. We also have an annual HD walk, Huntington's disease walk. It's a walk that my sister-in-law and my brother put together, and it's one of our biggest fundraisers for Huntington's disease. This year, that weekend, we have the opening of the exhibit on Friday. Saturday, my cousin Anna, who runs Woody Guthrie Publications and the Woody Guthrie Foundation, will be coming. She put together a presentation called She Came Along to Me, which through Woody's journals and Woody's wife, Marjorie, my grandmother, her journal, she put together how Woody and Marjorie story, managed through Huntington's. He was one of the first individuals who was actually diagnosed with Huntington's. So finding out that he had it, how do they tell the kids? How do they manage their lives? And so she does this program and talks about that, because what Marjorie went on to do was she was a founder of the Committee to Combat Huntington's, which is now Huntington's Disease Society of America. She went to Congress for genetic testing for illnesses like Huntington's. She started the Tourette's Foundation, and she just kind of went on and took this and made it her life mission to find a cure for Huntington's. So we do what we call the garbage trail walk. So individuals come here at 8:30 in the morning, they register, and then they all get bused up to Teresa's Stockbridge Cafe, which is the former Alice's restaurant, through a fleet of microbuses. I'm not kidding, VW microbuses. It's not a joke.
How else would you get there?
Right. And they have breakfast, and they get the update from our friend Jim Pollard, who's very involved with Huntington's, on where we're at with the cure. And then they make their way back to the church with these fun little stops along the way. And they kind of travel the route of where Arlo dumped the garbage and all that fun stuff. But she came along to me. Will be Saturday night with my cousin Anna.
Saturday the 18th.
The 18th. And then so Anna does her presentation, and then I perform with my brother Abe. We'll just have some fun playing music. So.
Mo, do you want to tell us about some of the Troubadour series and exciting things that are coming up this spring?
You know, Hubby Jenkins coming.
Yes, we do. Yeah, this will be his first time here. Actually, I'm very excited.
Very important, especially in Black folk and Americana, and bringing all of those contributions to the fore. Was a founding member of the Carolina Chocolate Drops.
But just as a whole, the Guthrie Center has, in my lifetime, always had some kind of summertime concert series. We call it our Troubadour series. May 25th, we'll kick off the Troubadour series, starting with Ellis Paul. Hubby Jenkins will be following him the next weekend, and so on and so forth. Tony Trishka will be back at the Guthrie Center this year. Tom Chapin, and many, many others that we're just so blessed to have. Providing music to the community is also a part of what we do here at the Guthrie Center.
When I hear the name Guthrie, we're speaking with Annie Guthrie and Mo Guthrie in the Guthrie Center in Great Barrington. I jokingly mentioned, but there's a picture of Woody on the front of the church that says, on his guitar, "This machine kills fascists."
That's a union that'll tear the fascists down.
Pete Seeger's banjo said, "This machine surrounds hate and forces it to surrender." When I think of Woody Guthrie, and when I think of Pete Seeger, and when I think of Arlo Guthrie, and now when I think of you two, and when I think of this place, that's what I think about. I think about the music being able to change the hearts and minds of people. You're Guthries. What does the Guthrie legacy and name mean to you? Mo Guthrie?
We are Guthries, and I think the legacy is not lost on me at all. I have a deep appreciation. I'm very proud of our heritage, but also we're all just folks. Growing up in the Guthrie family is no different than growing up in any other family. We love each other very much, and we just happen to love music.
And I grew up with Pete, and to me, he was grandpa first, and then he was an incredible inspiration. And the same thing for many other of my dad's friends. That includes Hoyt Axton, was my dad's cousin, so he was family. I got to know these people as people and then learn to appreciate them. Much like you might have learned to appreciate Woody, I had to do the same. I didn't know him.
Right.
I knew his friends. I knew people that taught the world the same information that you have about Woody is what I got. I just happened to also live in it. Pete probably scolded me for doing something, cartwheels on stage or whatever it was,
Playing electric. No, that's a fabricated story.
It
It's
is
overblown.
a totally fabricated story. But they were family.
Well, and I remember when I was, very young, kind of going off of what my mother was saying, when Pete would come over, I was allowed to skip school. And my mother would tell me that this was because I would learn more in a day from being around Pete than I would behind the desk for that day. At the time, when you're a kid, you're not so much focused on this is the great Pete Seeger or anything like that. It's a different experience,
I remember the first time I met Johnny Cash.
Hello, I'm Johnny Cash.
I had no idea who John and June Cash were. And I remember walking into his trailer, and he was the type of person in the room who demanded your attention. Just standing there. He didn't even do anything. He was just this enormous person. And June was also enormous. She was very tall. I had no idea. And I remember it was after that I fell in love with their music. And, Ramblin' Jack, he's very quiet unless he's talking. Ramblin' Jack could tell you stories for days. I remember one time he came up and he asked if I wanted him to tell me a bedtime story, and I said no. And
I want to go to bed tonight.
Right. He said, well, why not? And I said, I have school tomorrow. And he said, well, I could come to your school. And I was like, there's only 6 hours. We have 6 hours of a day at school. There's not enough time for a Ramblin' Jack story.
So Ramblin' Jack, not just a clever name.
Not just a clever name. He was a talker.
Well earned.
Yeah, this place, this family legacy, it's important. We understand it. And the side of the Guthries, aside from the music, is my dad's always taught us there's no throwaway people. My grandmother and my grandfather were very involved in their community and helping individuals. So that part of the legacy is what we do here, as well as the music. And I love working with my son, working with my dad still, and kind of just making sure that Shivadas, or Mo, and I continue the family legacy in the way that Arlo kind of sees it.
Head to the Guthrie Center's website to find out about their Troubadour series and about the Garbage Walk happening this Saturday. The Valley is abuzz with the news that the Iron Horse Music Hall in Northampton is about to reopen, and we will be there tomorrow when it does.
But up next, Americorps volunteers Jahan Pluas, Azzy Cordona, and Liam Russell on this Saturday's All Love Field Day happening in Holyoke.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Northeast Solar, helping customers make the switch to solar for savings, energy security, and tax incentives. Learn more at northeast-solar.com.
One thing that has become apparent to more people over the past few years is that having a place for LGBTQIA+ youth to commune safely with their peers is vital to their well-being.
And this Saturday, May 18th, one of those organizations will be hosting a field day that's free and open to the public and is being helmed by All Love and aided by a number of local organizations, including Americorps.
Joining us today to talk about the event and their connections to it are Jahan Pluas, Azzy Cordona, and Liam Russell. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, what is All Love?
All Love is basically the name of our TSP group. So we are all three of us are part of Americorps, Dallas South Americorps members, serving different sites. So like Liam serves at an alternative school like I do too, but he serves at Lighthouse. I serve at Opportunity Academy, both in Holyoke. As he serves at HOC within Las Familias, which is the LGBT Center. We have other members also joining us that are part of our TSP group. Basically, one of our members came up with the name All Love. It's a very common phrase we use in Holyoke just to show that, like everything's all love.
We got a little bit of some Scrabble letters in here. What is a TSP group?
TSP group is a team service project, is what it is.
And so that's through Americorps?
Yeah, so every year Americorps members are required to, it's one of the requirements is to do a team service project where we try to serve the community, but using the community assets that are there already. So we do a lot of asset mapping at the beginning and figure out like what assets we know ourselves personally. Then afterwards we look around the community, see what other assets are already there. Like we have HOC.
HOC?
House of Colors.
House of Colors.
House of Colors. Okay, good. Now everybody's on the same page.
But yeah, HOC, which is House of Colors, is one of the assets, and Las Familias, which is part of it. And Las Familias is basically just a steel organization, but they have multiple sections in there.
Azzy?
And Las Familias is a family resource center in Holyoke, and they do incredible work. I love them. So they have a lot of different sectors, like they have Nuevo Camino, which helped with victims of crime, victims of trauma. And then we have the House of Colors, which is the only queer youth-centered space in Holyoke. And that's what I run. And we also have FRC for family resources, Wayfinders. They're just amazing.
How did you come to be in charge of House of Colors?
So I got stationed from Americorps. How Americorps works is that they take people and they station them around. And I got stationed for House of Colors at Enlace. I always make sure that twice a week that we have workshop, but we're open Monday through Thursday, 9 to 5. And I love the job. Like, I take good care of the kids. They're very good to me. And yeah, we just have a grand old time.
How many kids are you working with HOC in Holyoke?
24 in total, but I usually have an attendance of 6 to 10 youth at a time for my workshops. And the day that we don't have a workshop, it's usually like 2 to 3, so that they can get personal time, whether they want to work on a project, just talk, chill.
What are some of the resources that you're bringing to the youth in Holyoke through HOC?
We are going to take a different direction for next year, but for this year, I wanted to implement more live your youth. Because, outside of HOC, they're constantly bombarded with schoolwork, family stuff, societal pressure. So I just want them to come into House of Colors to be themselves 100% and relax. But next year, we're going to implement more community work.
Tell us a little bit about this field day event that's happening this weekend. Where is it happening? When is it happening? Liam?
So the field day event is going to be held at Springdale Park.
Right across from Springdale Lunch, the Cajun Ladies?
I believe so.
Yeah.
I'm not sure too much.
I never heard of that.
Shameless plug.
There.
Great food, but continue.
So it's going to be held it's going to be held at Springdale Park. It's going to be from 11 to 3. We're going to have Tapestry come, which is a sexual health education center. We're going to have some there from the Holyoke's Farmers Market. And just a lot of other community organizations that specialize in helping people, making sure they get the resources they need. On top of that, we're also going to have field games, basketball, volleyball, just a place for kids to come and play. We're going to have a few different competitions. I think Azzy is going to run like the egg toss or like the spoon with the egg.
So just a bunch of little field games to everybody can just play. Hang out with each other.
Probably the most intriguing part, we're going to have free food. We're going to have hamburgers, hot dogs, chips, drinks, and that's all going to be free of charge.
John, want to talk about the importance of having an event like this where there's tons of fun stuff to do, but a lot of trying to engage with the local community with resources like in Tapestry and the farmers market and vendors that people in the community might see every day, and just getting everyone to kind of mingle in a relaxed sort of way.
That was a big part of it. And also, so at the beginning of our TSP project, we continue on to do the asset mapping, and after that, we formed personal interview questions, and we started going around asking people, having conversations with them about what the community needed. Because again, we didn't want to come in and just say we think the community needs this, whether we live in it or not. It's we didn't want to come up with our ideas and okay, this is what we want to do. So we got information from the community and figure out what the theme was. A lot of it was disconnection between authorities and just the community in general was a big disconnect. So the group came up with the idea of the field day, because we thought it was important to let's have some fun, and sometimes within fun, a lot of times we build a lot of connections a lot more. In the world of such darkness, we want to connect the world with more fun. People bond over food, people bond over games, and it's getting to know someone, especially we want to have the police department there, people with authority, and just give an event where titles don't matter at the same time. Because a lot of the problem is just when someone has a certain title, people tend to run away from that person or just see that person as that title. Now, if you put them in an environment where everyone technically gets a chance to just be a kid almost, no matter what age it is, and it just bonds them together, and I think that's a beautiful thing, and it helps people connect together, because then afterwards, this only happens one day for a couple hours, but then afterwards, they'll see each other on the street and be like, oh, I know that officer, and they feel more comfortable with that officer. Oh, I know that teacher, I feel more comfortable with that teacher. It just builds that bond between people, and I think it's very important, and it helps build the community together, because then now, when we have resources from Springfield and Holyoke coming together, now how can we help each other out? Now it's just not just Holyoke and Springfield separate. Now we're just one whole city together, because it takes a village to raise a kid, and I'm a firm believer of that. And just bringing those communities together is we have our own separate problems, but if we come together, we can help one another, not just be just by ourselves. We can take those problems and actually tackle them and become one community instead of just two different communities. All Love thing is literally open to the whole public, because again, we're doing this for youth, and we want other people to come in. We want people to bring their families and friends just to come through.
In Americorps, do you often find yourselves in the organizations you've been assigned to collaborating on events like this?
We only serve for about 10.5 months. Mm-hmm. After that, if we do want to serve that term, we can. But the beautiful part about Americorps is that we get the opportunity to continue to know so many people throughout our service time. I have the ability to hey, can I join in of any projects, future projects you guys have? I can still find connections just because I was able to build that gap and get to know these people. But if someone decided hey, Opportunity Academy wants to the teachers to join in on a different project, I can. You know what I mean? So we all have the opportunity to join other projects if you want to.
Yeah, a perfect example was last week. I had Jahan host an empanadilla making for my youth, and that was great.
Nice. Jahan Pluas, Azzy Cardona, and Liam Russell, who are behind the field day happening under the auspices of All Love at Springdale Park in Holyoke this Saturday. Thank you all so much.
Well, thank you guys.
And I think it's the.
Time for us to dig into the rebirth of the Iron Horse.
Coming up, we'll talk with Iron Horse founder Geordie Harold, music writer David Sokol, Forbes library historian Dylan Gaffney, and former manager and waitstaff from the horse Mary Gravel.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by the UMass 5 College Credit Union, offering co-op advantage checking with cash back on all purchases, plus secure debit card controls, all from the UMass 5 mobile banking app. Insured by NCUA, umass5.coop.
Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. I'm Monty Belmonte.
And I'm Khalees Smith. Music alone shall live. It was the iconic motto stenciled upon the wall of the Iron Horse Music Hall on Center Street in Northampton. And music alone shall come back to life at the Iron Horse with the grand reopening of the club tomorrow. We'll be there broadcasting live with Rachel and Villery and the new team behind the new Iron Horse.
And while we will talk about the future of the Iron Horse on tomorrow's show, today we'll talk about its history. We're joined by Geordie Harold, one of the founders of the Iron Horse Music Hall. The club first opened on February 24th, 1979 as a bohemian cafe with 85 seats. His partner, John Riley, not to be confused with Johnny Memphis, who is also John Riley, brought the first jazz shows to the club, but by the early 80s, the Iron Horse became a magnet for the folk and singer-songwriter scene, attracting future legends like Tracy Chapman, Suzanne Vega, Dar Williams, and oh so many more.
We are also joined by David Sokol, who was the music editor for the Valley Advocate from 1977 through 93. Along with Geordie, he co-authored a memoir about the Iron Horse. It's called Positively Center Street, and it's available through Amherst Levelers Press.
And it was in the Shea Theater green room, but I think one of the artists must have walked off with it because I went to go try to get it in the green room earlier this morning and it was gone. But it's a great book.
You can always get another copy.
That's right. We're also joined by another Iron Horse historian, Dylan Gaffney, who's the Information Services Associate for Local History and Special Collections at the Forbes Library. Our engineer, Betsy Lankto, very jealous about that role as an archivist. The Forbes Library Archives has recently signed an agreement with Geordie to add his Iron Horse archives to their collection.
And what would the horse have been without the people working hard behind the scenes? Mary Gravel joins us. She was a longtime affiliation with the music club from waitressing in the early to mid 1980s, starting a few weeks before the first anniversary and then returning to the manager position, but then going back to waiting tables because tip money is better sometimes.
Yeah, entertainment. It's tough.
She also did bookkeeping for the horse in the early 90s and was general manager for half a year in 1994. We are going to have so many war stories to trade because I also waited tables at the horse for about 3 years.
Yeah, that could be fun. The only thing I ever ordered from the horse kitchen was the brownie sundae, but you were recommending
as I was
the
mentioning,
chicken salad.
the chicken salad was the other thing to get.
Mary, what did you like to serve for people when you were waitressing there? What were people really into food-wise at the Iron Horse before we get into the details of the club and its history?
What was interesting was back in the day, I did know customers by what they would order. So sometimes I didn't even know their names, but I knew that they were going to get a falcon, which was a carob milkshake kind of a thing.
Geordie gasped audibly when you said the falcon.
Yeah.
And Geordie, what did you get? Because even when you were no longer officially associated with the club, you'd still go there frequently and had your own table and everything, right?
Yep. Often with the baby.
Oh.
In the carrier.
Yes. Years and years of babies and carriers. But I don't know. I think the Iron Horse food that I absolutely ate the most and probably sustained me through the 1980s was grabbing 1/4 of a cold quiche and shoving it in my mouth because I was always doing 15 things at once.
So if you know the layout of the Iron Horse, this is going to make more sense. But if you don't, you're in downtown Northampton. There's Main Street. You pull off of Center Street, which is kind of an unassuming street. And then on the unassuming street...
Weirdly across the street from the police.
Yeah, not far from the police station and a big church. But it's not a place that would jump out at you as a perfect place for a club. So what drew you to this now iconic place on Center Street, Geordie?
I think everything in my life is a series of happy accidents. And, I started the Iron Horse with John Riley, who was my partner for the first year and a half or two that we were at the location. But we were hanging out one night at Sheehan's, which was an Irish bar that then sort of became a music hangout place with a musical history all its own. Went on to have bands like Fish and Blues Traveler in the basement there. But in the 70s, hanging out at Sheehan's, all that there was the rather beautiful Irish bar and a back room which had vinyl tile floor, one fluorescent light strip, and 3 automobile seats scattered around. And at one point, John and I, who just sort of imagined ourselves, as somewhat young bon vivants, went in and just said, there really has to be more. Mm-hmm. And we shook on, well, let's do something. And I remember saying that, well, we need to do something, but we need to do it because when you're younger, your time seems different. And I said we need to do it within 3 months. Uh-huh. And so
it's good to have
John,
deadlines.
Yeah. So John came within 6 weeks and said, hey, I hear there's a place for rent on this street called Center Street. Let's go look at it. And so we went and looked at it, and it was the thing that presented itself. It was $375 a month. It's a little bit different than things are now. So that was
a little bit.
that was acting in its favor, and it had good vibes. It had good bones, in the sense that it had a 17-foot ceiling and a wood floor, and there were possibilities there.
And those will live again. We'll hear tomorrow on the show. Where does the name the Iron Horse come from?
The name the Iron Horse comes from not having had a name for whatever the nascent venture was going to be.
Yeah.
And
so we gave ourselves a deadline.
Right.
3 months.
Right. And so we were getting really within weeks of opening, and there was no name. And my family at that point lived in the Berkshires, and my mother is a painter, a sculptor, and a metal sculptor. And I was looking out the window at the meadows around the house with my siblings saying, we need a name for this place. And we were doing the kind of punch-drunk riff on a name. Well, you could call it Through the Window, or you could call it The Mountains Beyond, or you could call it Yonder Apple Tree, or you could call it, because there were all these metal sculptures galloping through the meadow, you could call it the Iron Horse. And I thought, all right, that might work. Yeah. And then my mother offered that we could take that Iron Horse and make it part of, the logo or the presence as a symbol in the club. And that's where it came from. But of course, a lot of people bring different things to the name themselves. They bring baseball players and they bring locomotives, but
and that horse was in the window.
Yes, it was.
The sculpture?
Yeah.
Back in your era there, Mary Gravel?
Yes.
What brought you to the Iron Horse in its early days? I said in the intro, the year anniversary of it opening up?
I had been working at a few other places in town. I worked at Fitzwilly's. I worked at the Bagel Deli. And I loved going into the Iron Horse because they had the espresso machine, and and it was open during the day.
And you went because it was a cafe, and I think that's something people leave out too. We think of it as an iconic music club, but it was like a daytime.
Yeah, during the day they had it was open all the time, and during the day there were foreign magazines and chessboards, and it was just a very welcoming place. People would come and spend hours. So anyway, I think, did I see a sign in the window that you were looking for help, or did I just say, can I have a job?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
So anyway, I got a job there. And I think I started the day or two after I said, can I have a job? There I was.
That tracks for the Iron Horse.
Yeah.
And you were waiting tables, but you became a manager and bookkeeper and all those other things. And your son, who, if I don't mention him on the radio, I'm going to have to do 50 extra push-ups tonight in Kung Fu class. Morgan also grew up in that scene with Neil, who'll be on the show tomorrow, Neil Robinson, who spans the gap between the old horse and the Geordie era.
In fact,
through the Eric Show
era.
There was
one story about Morgan where...
he told me if I mentioned him that you would not be able to stop talking about him. Yeah, so we can do this story.
He was actually Lucy Blue Tremblay. Is that her name?
That's
anyway, she was... he would he would start dancing, and the musicians would ask him up on the stage.
I think it's Dar Williams, because he might have told me this story.
He had they had a crush on each other too. There's another one. She said she wanted a child just like him. No, it was open during the day, and what I liked about waitressing at night was, I was just telling these guys in the room that it wasn't like working at a restaurant where you get bored because it's always the same. Every night was so different, depending on the musician and the audience, because an Irish band would bring in a totally different audience than a smoky jazz band or a country artist. It was just so different every single shift.
David Sokol, who's a longtime music writer for the Valley Advocate, which still exists in one way, shape, or form, but in its heyday, while the Iron Horse is coming to life. Tell me about what the music scene was like then and your early memories of the early Iron Horse and writing about it in the paper.
Well, the scene was kind of slow in the 70s. Northampton was a pretty sleepy little town. And I always look back on Geordie and John opening that club in early 1979, and for the couple of years after that as the beginning of a renaissance that I was seeing take place. There were more music. There weren't a lot of music venues in town, and people started coming from all over to go to concerts, to have dinner, and during the 80s, Northampton really became a much more, at least from my perspective, a much more exciting place to be. And I was fortunate those were the glory days for the Advocate, and so I was responsible starting in 1977 for filling pages with music copy, and I tried to make it as much local music copy as possible. And we did concert reviews, we did previews. I did this thing called Coming This Week, which sort of spotlighted one show coming up in the area, and it could be an area. It could be as anywhere from Brattleboro down to Enfield. So it was a pretty big area. And as time went by into the 80s, more and more concerts got that slot because there was more and more concerts. At the Iron Horse got that slot because it was just the booking that was being done by Geordie and the other people that you worked with was in another league than what was going on at a lot of other places.
And then I got my wrist slapped because although David did give us coming this week at least 2 out of 4 weeks every month, I wanted more. And so I
doesn't every promoter.
I conspired with the ad rep who wanted more commissions that I could build a block that looked exactly like Coming This Week and put it on the next page. But they slapped me down pretty quickly.
That's Geordie Herald, one of the Iron Horse founders, and David Sokol, writer for the Valley Advocate.
But then eventually there was that in the Advocate, like you just see this giant page of all the things that like the horse was getting up to, and like I love that. I love that that's coming back.
Yeah, and I miss when I moved to the Valley 20 years ago, looking in the Advocate and seeing all the great shows that were coming up and all of these artists coming on the Iron Horse page. And now again, you're seeing it living on social media. We'll be there for the new Iron Horse and talking about that tomorrow. David Sokol, though, as a Valley Advocate, a music writer, was there a moment or an artist that when they came to the Iron Horse, you felt like it was a sea change? Not to mention Beck, who came there to preview the album Sea Change, which was one of my favorite shows at the Iron Horse. But that was 15 years ago.
There were quite a few.
Yeah.
And one of them was one I think that I did do a Coming This Week for, was John Hendricks from Lambert, Hendricks and Ross. And he just blew me away. I mean, I just felt like I was in a wonderful little club in Manhattan or in a big city, and to be able to walk in and out of 20 Center Street and have it be like I'm back in the streets of Northampton again after seeing John Hendricks was pretty amazing. There was a lot that were like that, but Geordie had a way of bringing in shows that were so varied in their scope, and again working with a bunch of other people who were suggesting acts that would come in there, but there really wasn't anything else happening in the area that was like that in the mid 80s.
We're talking about the history of the Iron Horse in Northampton on the eve of the rebirth of the Iron Horse in Northampton. Let's bring Dylan Gaffney into the conversation. He's the Information Services Associate for Local History and Special Collections at the Forbes Library. This is history now. You have conspired with Geordie here to make an archive at the Forbes. Why is the Iron Horse something... You have a presidential library at the Forbes Library and the Calvin Coolidge Library. Why is the Iron Horse such an important thing that it merits being archived in the Library of Note in Northampton?
Well, I would say that I worked in the archives for a while, and the longer I spent in our archive, and it's not unique to us, there's huge gaps of things that they just didn't collect on at all. They didn't collect on Black history. They didn't collect on queer history. They didn't collect on music history. So as just sort of an exercise in my early years as an archivist, I was like, what would my dream project be? And it was really to build a Western Mass music archive. It was to record the sort of cultural life that I grew up around. And I went to the Iron Horse as a kid. My dad would bring me to jazz shows there all the time. And then as a teenager, I would go in. So I just knew that this was a unique opportunity. If the materials were saved, not everybody saves their things. They're dispensed. Some people hold them tightly and do not want to let them go. So, yeah.
How does your collection of things pertaining to the Iron Horse compare to like collecting things about the Bay State, which I also know that you did? Like local music has been your thing. How does the Iron Horse's resources compare in comparison?
Well, we don't have the Bay State's business records, which might be for good reason.
I think the statute of limitations is out.
Jordy kept meticulous records. Jordy has an archivist's mind and a historian's mind in a lot of ways, so he had incredibly organized records, and they also represent the business side and what it was like to run a restaurant and what it was like to employ people and to book bands. So there's incredible documentation of the back and forth. There's thousands of contracts. There's photos, posters. So with the Bay State, people were giving us, these are my 4 flyers I have from a number of people. This is one incredible 30-plus boxes of one massive collection.
There's an Instagram page. Is that run by you?
That is run by me.
Okay, I didn't know if it was like a competing archive, but I've been looking through some of those photos, and that's excellent. You can see that. It's a very big, it seems to be at the beginning of this revealing of the archive. But if people want to go and delve into the history themselves of the Iron Horse, are the archives available to go and peruse as a patron of the Forbes Library?
They are. In fact, Jordy's daughter came into the archive one day without announcing her identity. Her friend wanted to scan some negatives, and I was like, well, we don't really do that, but sure, let's scan. And while you wait, take a look around, and 2 teenage kids went into the far aisle, and I was like, should I let them? Where do I draw the line here with access? And I drew the line at open access, which is what we try to move towards. And then it turned out, I found out by running into Jordy at the supermarket that it was actually his daughter. So I'm glad I did.
Who is a hoot. Came on the march for the food bank and marched right up near my cart for a lot of that march. Well, let's take a quick little break, and coming up we'll talk more about the history of the Iron Horse Music Hall, which will reopen officially tomorrow. We're talking with Jordy Harold, who's one of the founders, music writer David Sokol, Forbes Library historian Dylan Gaffney, and former manager and waitstaff Mary Gravel.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM. Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. We are here with Iron Horse founder Jordy Harold, music writer David Sokol, Forbes Library historian David Gaffney, and former manager and waitstaff from the Iron Horse, Mary Gravel, to talk about the history of the Iron Horse reopening tomorrow.
I thought it might be fun because we've all had a relationship with the Iron Horse in one way, shape, or form. Mine was the after the Jordy era officially, or he was transitioning out of owning it and more just booking it into the Eric Shore era. But what are some of... But, Dylan, you grew up going there, you mentioned. I thought we'd go one by one and say some of our favorite show or memory from the history of the Iron Horse. Why don't we start with you, Dylan?
Yeah, so my dad, as I said, took us to a lot of shows. I saw a lot of huge, big names, but probably the memory that most sticks in my mind is I'm 15 or 16 years old. Willie Dixon was playing there, and I'm a weird 15-year-old, so I'm really into Willie Dixon, and I decide to go downstairs to the green room and just go in and introduce myself to Willie Dixon, because of course he wants to meet this 15-year-old skater kid from Northampton. Sure. This little kid just being like, hi. And he was there with a big bottle of something and just looks at me like, no. No, this is not happening. It's like, my regards, and sort of just headed out. But the show was amazing. His voice, something about people's voices in that room, it's just incredible the way you can hear a really amazing singer. Betty Carter, Natalie Merchant. I'm just thinking of all these people whose voices just completely filled that room and just blew me away.
Mary Gravel, former manager, bookkeeper, waitstaff at the Iron Horse.
I have to say, I was pretty young when I first worked there, and I think that probably what really impressed me were two female artists that were older at the time, Rosalie Sorrells and Odetta. And both women were phenomenal storytellers, were phenomenal songwriters and interpreters, and they also were very, very fun and very kind to me. And I think it's just important to talk about them. They're both dead, but I would say they are one of my fondest memories of people playing there.
David Sokol, former music writer for the Valley Advocate in its heyday and big, huge music aficionado to this very day, with an Iron Horse Music Hall hat on right now.
That matches his shirt.
Yeah,
Came in
perfect.
coordinated.
Perfect.
You know, it's funny, after you just said that, the first concert that popped into my head just now actually isn't a music concert. It was a comedy concert, and it was the first concert that we ever took our daughter Jessica to see. And it was Stephen Wright. This was before the club expanded. There was maybe 75 or 80 people there at the club at the time, and we were right up close. And I remember at one point, Jess, who was like 6 months old at the time, gurgled. You know, she did like a 6-year-old. She was very well behaved, but she did like a little 6-month-old gurgle. And Stephen Wright goes, the fans are getting younger and younger all the time in his deadpan voice. And it was just like for me there were so many concerts that I could mention, but for that one was kind of historic for me in a way.
I love that. I love that the family aspect is part of it too. I've talked to your son, Mary, many times about the memories that he has growing up in that club, and we mentioned your daughter going to the archives with Dylan and looking up
and being a baby at shows.
Yeah, being a baby at shows. Jordy Harold, as the co-founder of the Iron Horse, it's almost unfair to ask you this, but one of your favorite memories of the Iron Horse?
That is the ultimate unfair question to ask me, because
I didn't say your favorite.
Right,
one of.
There's almost 10,000 shows that I booked in and around the room. So. And just like to tick off the iconic moments. There was like Ted Hawkins, and the moment that he just raised his hand and said, "There stands the glass." It was like everybody, like the world froze. Or just to have Richard Thompson in there and be in the face of such virtuosity. And then, as we might have discussed off mic, a lot of the programming that I did at the Horse was communitarian in the sense that there were people suggesting shows and other people presenting shows, and I had to kind of like hold that within the envelope of the club and make sure that everything happened to a certain standard or caliber. But at one point, a couple of people who were on the waitstaff said, "Well, could we present a show?" And I said, "Sure." And they said, "Well, there's this jazz guitarist that I really like, and they wanted to do it." And it was Mike Stern, who was playing in a band with Bob Berg, who has since passed away. And they weren't the biggest name on the spectrum, although Mike Stern and was one of many of the Miles Davis guitarists.
Yeah.
Who, Schofield was a Miles Davis guitarist, and I think even Frizzell did 10 minutes. And they all show up at one point or another. And all I remember is that these two people created a production company that only produced one show. It was I don't even remember exactly the name. It was something like Red Lion Presents, and this concert, which miraculously was almost full was dueling guitar and saxophone, basically, with a full fusion band behind it, except it was what they call in jazz a cutting contest, right? Where, I'm going to play 8 bars of this and you see what you can do with that. And it was like, oh yeah? Oh yeah? Oh yeah? Oh yeah? And I was like, this cannot go any higher. And it just kept getting higher and people were shrieking in the room. So you have to fast forward to Mike Stern was playing Birdland a couple of months ago in New York, and I was like, what the hell? New York is not that far, and you're still not that old at almost 70. You can just go down to New York for a show, Jordy. And they went down to New York, and I actually, for a rare moment, bought a ticket because it was easier than trying to scare someone up and pull out old management contacts. And went with one of my best friends. He absolutely, delivered in a show with not only Dennis Chambers on drums, but Victor Wooten on bass from Bella Fleck and the Flecktones. I was like, this is heaven. And the show was great. And Stern has gotten to the age where he can't quite hold the pick, so he glues the pick between his fingers.
Wow.
With
Super glue.
cosmetic safe glue for every show. And at the end of the night, I said, like, okay, I really hate to do this. I hate to be this guy, but I'm going to go up and say hello. And I went up and said hello, and I said, you probably don't remember me. 1,000 years ago, Iron Horse. He goes like, best carrot cake in the world, man.
He didn't try the brownie sundae or the chicken salad.
It might not have existed yet.
Maybe. Khalees, we only have a couple seconds left, but you worked at the Iron Horse. What's one of your favorite memories?
Oh, my goodness. Okay, well, Wynton Marsalis, for one.
Yeah.
Getting to see the rise of, like, Grizzly Bear, the Avett Brothers.
Mm-hmm.
I have a memory of a Winter Pills show that was one of the worst I'd ever experienced. It wasn't because of the Winter Pills, it was because of who they were opening for. And just so many. Oh, Dr. John.
Nice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mac Rebenak.
Mac Rebenak.
Yeah.
Beck, do shows a day of Fred Eaglesmith. Felice Brothers for the first time. Kathleen Edwards. The list goes on and on.
The Felice Brothers left such a mess.
Yeah, they were
such a mess.
They're inebriated wonders. Well, Geordie Harold, one of the Iron Horse founders, music writer David Sokol, Forbes Library historian Dylan Gaffney, and former manager and waitstaff from the Iron Horse, Mary Gravel. Thanks for sharing your Iron Horse memories with us today.
And thanks for posting them online, especially. You can go to their Instagram page, see that the Smashing Pumpkins played there in '91 for $5.
Oh, I didn't even know that. Well, tomorrow on the Fabulous 413, we're broadcasting from the new Iron Horse Music Hall on Center Street with the opening night headliners, Rachel Price of Lake Street Dive fame and Vil Ree.
And we'll also chat with Chris Freeman, Executive Director of the Parlor Room Collective, who now run the Iron Horse, and Operations Manager Neil Robinson, who may have more stories about that spot than basically anybody else.
And Geordie definitely didn't bring non-champagne sparkling wine from California. Congratulations on over 40 years. Cheers.
Cheers. Hey.